Hello, everyone. My name is Patrick King, and you're here for another edition of Sustainable Nashville Live. This is the series that kind of just opens a doorway between the public and organizations and people that are doing great work around sustainability here in Nashville. And today, I'm here with Laura Zapata, founder and CEO of Clearloop. A few reminders before we get started. If you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel, you should definitely go do that right now. Just search Urban Green Lab on YouTube, smash the subscribe button, done. You'll be doing us a really big favor. Also, Urban Green Lab is a nonprofit, so if you do feel so inclined to make a donation and support the work that we do, feel free to visit our website, urbangreenlab.org. You can make a donation that way, or you can text 4434 on your phone and it'll send you a donation link directly to your phone. And with that, we are going to get started. So Laura, how are you doing today?
Great. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, this is exciting. I feel like this is like the new normal where we talk like this all the time. So this is just like another normal day.
Yeah, just another normal day. That's a great way to look at it. The days in 2020 are anything but normal, but this is like a nice consistency where I feel comfortable that where we've come to.
Yeah, exactly. And now we get to have these conversations and get to know each other, even if it's in this weird time.
Absolutely. That's a great silver lining.
Trying.
Could you start by telling us what Clearloop is and some of the work that you all do?
Yeah, so Clearloop is a brand new startup here in Nashville. We're based out of Nashville. We started with 3 people, myself included, and 2 other gentlemen, Bob Corney and former Governor Phil Bredesen. And we started this company in early 2019, basically to say, you know, there's a bunch of companies out there that are looking to take some sort of climate action that is tangible and real, but it's really complicated to go out into the world and try to figure out what's real, what's not. And so we figured, hey, you know, greenhouse gases are the number one reason we have climate change. Let's make it really simple for people to be able to reduce greenhouse gases, starting with our electricity grid. So for every carbon footprint that a company has, Clearloop then goes and builds new solar capacity that will reclaim or offset that carbon footprint from the electricity grid. So a company is basically getting a solar carbon offset. So instead of buying a tree, they're buying a new solar panel that will be replacing some fossil fuel plant from generating electricity.
Okay. Sweet. Very concise way to explain that. And it's a solar carbon offset. Is that what you're saying?
That's basically what it is. And so we've tried to figure out, okay, how do you talk about Clearloop in a way that makes it really easy to understand? But essentially, you know, people are used to buying trees as a way to reduce greenhouse gases. We know our electricity grid is incredibly dirty. It's one of the number 1 polluters for the United States. And so we're basically getting companies' interest in investing into some tangible greenhouse gas reductions and getting them to pay for a portion of building these new solar projects in the places that are getting left behind. These are places like Tennessee and others where there's not a lot of sort of political regulatory reason to change. The grid is not being sort of replenished or replaced, and that infrastructure is not being built fast enough. And so we're getting these companies, you know, they're getting all the sort of carbon attributes associated with reducing, but with building this new solar facilities, and those communities get to benefit from new clean energy going into their grid and powering our lights and the things we don't even think about these days.
Yeah, no, that I really like that idea of solar carbon offsetting as opposed to, as I'm sure you know, just carbon offsetting as far as planting trees. Recently, it has been kind of found to be fraught with issues of, you know, just planting non-native species of trees, or, you know, not even really knowing if trees were actually planted and whether or not they were upkept to make sure they reach maturity. And I feel like this is a more direct way where there are immediate tangible benefits.
Right. And it's a direct thing. And so what we saw in the initial sort of idea for Clearloop came out of this just as consumers, we're not, climate scientists. Just as
Mm-hmm.
consumers, we saw it in the world. These companies are now offering consumers a way to offset their, even their flights. And so it was really hard to understand as a consumer why, like how they were doing that, and how this tree or this new thing would do it. And so I think that for us, it was just, here's a problem. We have a really dirty grid. It's sort of, we have the technology to do it. We just need more capital investments. And so how do we get companies a really easy way to apply that investment into building brand new solar facilities that they get to brand and label, but ultimately who gets to benefit is that community that will be using clean energy without even having to worry about it.
I love that. That is amazing.
It's still a work in progress, but I mean, we're every day, but it's an exciting goal and venture for sure.
Yeah. So, how did the organization get started? Like, where did all this synthesize? And also, I'll say that a colleague insisted that I ask this question because it's a fun story.
Yeah. So, it's a very interesting journey here. Like I said, we're not sort of from the sustainability world. It's a motley crew of people. We have, like I said, my two other co-founders. One is Gen X and the other one is a boomer. So, and I'm a millennial. So we really came together with this interest in trying to figure out how do we make some positive contributions. So we came together as a result of the governor's Senate campaign in 2018. We're not, and I like to say to people who are not from Tennessee, or if they weren't in Tennessee at that point in time, if they've watched the Taylor Swift documentary, that we are a big subject of discussion in that documentary. So shout out to Taylor Swift on that one.
I think that's the first shout out in this series. So good on you.
Oh, good. We try to keep it interesting. I try to insert her in any way I can with 1989 babies. But the whole idea was really, okay, well, we have all this experience. We have all this desire to try to figure out how do we invest back in our community. And this was a way to say, okay, well, we don't have to wait for government to come in and step up. There's a lot of companies here, the US is sort of known, sort of a lot of enterprising people have come together to do all kinds of businesses, and businesses today are sort of at the forefront of a lot of the climate change initiatives that are happening and climate action initiatives. And so we figured, let's take what we know about companies, what we know about our community, and try to figure out a really simple way to apply greenhouse gas reductions, getting companies to invest into something really tangible and something we can communicate in a really simple way, because climate change is scary, science is scary, it turns a lot of people off. So maybe we can offer a really practical silver lining, or maybe a ray of sunshine, for people to come in and say, okay, if I work with this company, if I support this company, if I'm buying as my purchasing power, that's just as powerful as my vote. And we can get these companies to move and really make some tangible investments in cleaning up our grid.
Yeah, beautiful story. Also, really big fan of puns. So
good. Same here.
You're checking all the boxes. Thank you. Awesome. Let's see here. How has COVID impacted the work that you all do, and how have you adapted?
Yeah, so it's been an interesting year, to say the least, for everybody. I think, starting a company and starting something new in a space that we didn't have, we weren't experts in, has been an interesting, it's always interesting to start a business in that way. I think for us, what we found is that we started going after a lot of the companies that were getting pressure, that were starting to also make announcements. So those were a lot of the companies in the US that were getting pressure from flight shaming, so travel, whether it was airlines or different travel industry adjacent companies. And so when we started talking to them, when we announced that we were open for business last October, there were some really interesting, good conversations. But then as COVID hit, we obviously had to really rethink our strategy and who the players were, who were the companies that were going to now be investing, and would sustainability sort of take a back seat. What we found was that once we paused, we said, okay, let's use the bad times to get ready for the good times, and then figure out a way to just go after some of these companies that were actually, looking to reset after, or, post COVID, or thinking about taking the COVID time to really think about what their commitments are. And so after we sort of moved away from the travel industry, because obviously they have many other acute issues to deal with, we found a lot of companies that are looking for ways to offer. We can't go back to business as usual. There's a bunch of organizations that started the Build Back Better movement. Now, I know that it's been sort of taken over by a presidential campaign, but in early April, that was sort of the call to action for a lot of these companies that are really thinking about, okay, how do we take a pause? We have some time to think about do we get really intentional about rebuilding after this huge health crisis, and sustainability has really been at the core of that. How do we have a more sustainable world, and how do we make sure that we're making real tangible reductions in carbon emissions? And so we had to pause quite a bit and really rethink our strategy. But ultimately what we found was that there's even there's a more willingness from companies and all kinds of companies, from Fortune 500 companies that are willing to take a meeting over Zoom like this with us, to really small startups that are just, thinking about also, how are they going to relaunch or launch their products in a way that feels a lot more thoughtful and intentional.
Yeah, for sure. That adaptation during, I guess, times of crises, while it might not on its face seem like a great time to like rethink things, it's interesting that a lot of organizations and companies are taking that time to do so. Have there been any recent product launches or anything along those lines?
Yeah. In fact, this week we announced our first product partnership with Impact Snacks. So they are a brand new startup. What they try to do is basically two guys out of Boston. They both dropped out of college and decided that they were going to pursue this idea that they had. And so they had this, and they'd been sort of testing different formulas, but they came up with a new snack bar. So it's basically like a candy bar, but it's all sort of whole foods, natural. They're much better at explaining this than me, but their packaging is biodegradable, and they've made all the right sort of moves to make this snack bar as sustainable and sort of circular as possible. And so when they came to us, they liked the idea. They basically said, look, we've done everything we can to make this right and reduce all of the emissions associated with the ingredients, the packaging, sort of the life cycle of it. But we know that there's a carbon footprint associated with just creating a new business and creating a new product. What can we do we want to work with you guys to offset it? And so, and what we call reclaim. It's the same idea. You're not taking it out of your thing. You're taking it out of somewhere else. So, so with them, it was really just this. We got together with some actually local carbon accountants. They measured the carbon footprint of their bars. It turned out that they had done a really good job. A bar is only, I think, 0.3 pounds of carbon associated with the bar, but they're taking responsibility for a full pound. And so even though it's a small footprint, what they're hoping to do is sort of with their consumers, it's mostly Gen Z driven, that they will not just take responsibility for sort of the initial core, they've built some bar that's good for you, but also making sure that they're committed to doing something that's also good for the planet. And so this was an exciting thing for us, because that was the initial concept of Clearloop, is what if you could take the carbon footprint of an entire product and then build the equivalent amount of solar capacity to offset it and then generate clean energy for the lifetime of that project. And so it's sort of like a crowdfunding in our political background. It's a little bit of that sort of, $1 can really do quite a bit once you get that together with a bunch of, sort of the multiplying effect of individual actions can lead to something really good.
Yeah, something great. Also, you kind of tied it in perfectly with, I guess, kind of like the impetus of the name Clearloop. So that just hit me as well. Excellent. And what was the name of the brand that you all were working with?
Impact Snacks.
Impact Snacks. Okay.
Yeah. So we called it yesterday, I think, or this week we called it turning everyday snacking into clean energy. That was our little the way that we thought about getting people to lean in and listen to it.
Yeah, for sure. That's awesome. Do you know, and I guess this is a little off topic, but do you know if they're distributing here in Nashville, or is this something we should be on the lookout for? Or?
Yeah, so they're direct to consumer. They wanted to do a Kickstarter to sort of get their name out there. And so they started the Kickstarter this week. And I think they've already, within a few hours, they reached their goal. But they're continuing to go. But Impact Snacks, you can Google them. They are out there, and it's all direct to consumer. They've thought about everything from the packaging to what goes into it, even the box that it comes in. So it's an interesting company and concept, and I think we're going to start to see a lot more of that in response to just there's not a lot of options out there, and companies really see a need because as consumers they see the need themselves.
Yeah, and the power that consumers can have to kind of drive that social change or that sea change in industry is something that's really awesome.
Huge.
Yeah,
huge. I think that the value of just consumer action and just your purchasing power is so powerful that even an individual action when it feels so hard to sort of have an impact by yourself, you and sort of that multiplying force really is something to be reckoned with. And I think that that's why companies are responding the way that they are, and they're at the forefront of a lot of these changes and these commitments to reduce greenhouse gases because consumers are demanding it.
Yeah, for sure. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and what got you interested in sustainability?
Yeah, so I am not of this world. So I grew up in Memphis. My family's Colombian. We immigrated to the U.S. when I was 10, but I love Tennessee. It's always been home, but there was not a lot of opportunities for me here growing up, unfortunately. So after high school, went to college out of state, and then have always been really interested in sort of politics and the way that that's communicated out to the public, and because it affected my own sort of coming to America story. So I spent some time in the political world and at the federal level in both the House and the Senate side, but really around communications. And then for some reason my career has been around crisis communications for quite a bit. I in politics and also in the private sector. I worked at Uber for early on in 2014 when they were starting to go into cities that were a little bit harder to sort of tell the story of why it was important to have more options, and learned a few hard lessons there. But in 2016, I decided to jump out of that, go back into politics, and join the Hillary Clinton campaign. It's a historic campaign. And for me, it was just really personal to just go back in there and try to, dig in and sort of give back to this country. Went back after that loss, went back to Uber and did Uber Eats when they were expanding all around the country and the globe. I got to travel. I actually got to go to Colombia, which is very exciting, to visit my grandparents on business.
Nice.
It was a weird place to be, but very rewarding. And then in 2018, it was time to come back home because I saw that there was a competitive race happening here, and I needed to dig in one more time and sort of give back to the community that gave me so much here in Tennessee. And for me, it really is all around, what can you do as an individual, and sort of like where can you put in your thoughts and ideas and solve hard problems. And so for me, sustainability is part of that. There's a hard problem to solve, but if you can just dig in there and try to figure out where there's a lot of expertise, there's a lot of people willing to give you their time and share with you their research and sort of that passion that I found as I tapped into the sustainability community, and just sort of have found a really great community of people that have done individual things, sort of brought their talents to try to solve this thing. And so that's how I jumped into Clearloop, and why it was so important for me to get in there and solve this problem and do my part in it.
Yeah, that is a beautiful backstory. And also it seems like, I mean, you said at first you have like an affinity for like managing different crises, where you're just like, okay, I'm in San Francisco. Okay, I'm in Washington, D.C. Okay, I'm going back to Tennessee.
Yeah, exactly. It's, I don't know what it is, but I think it's that itch of just like being curious about how do you bring yourself to the problem, and what can you do yourself, but it's never sort of, you're never really alone in these things, especially I think with climate change. It is such it's a vast, giant problem, but we have some solutions and some practical ways that we can start striking and slashing at that problem. And I think if the more people bring their brains to the table, I think the more we're going to find that there are some really practical solutions that we can do individually that can multiply into something awesome.
Yeah, couldn't agree with you more. And it's also an issue that's not going anywhere. And if anything, it's ramping up and becoming more apparent and affecting more people's lives quicker than we would have suspected. So yeah, totally agree with you there. That multiplying effect.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Let's talk about the electrical grid for a second. Could you tell us a little bit about the U.S. electrical grid and why it's so dirty?
Yes, I know. I'm going to nerd out here, and
Perfect.
so I'm going to try not to. But basically, okay. So the United States has, this big grid across the country. Unfortunately, it is not all done the same, and so unfortunately, the sources of power, the different power plants that help make electricity are not all sort of the same across the country. I guess maybe to back up and sort of like lay the problem down is that the electricity grid is the number 2, right up there with transportation, for responsible for pollution in the United States. And so when you look at the carbon footprint of the United States, electricity is really the number, right neck and neck, number 2. So about a third of all of our carbon footprint for the United States comes from the electricity grid. That means that every time we turn on our lights, there's some fossil fuel that's being burnt. It's creating carbon, and that's causing climate change. And so we have the technology, we have solar, we have wind, we have battery storage, we have hydro, we have nuclear, we have all these different things that don't emit carbon into the atmosphere. They're zero emission energy sources. And so so the technology is there. Now the question is what happens when you gotta build more, and you gotta sort of retrofit or replace some of these fossil fuel plants to clean up the grid. What's happened is that in the past few years, there has been a record number of renewable energy projects being built, but that's because we started from basically zero. So today, the United States, in the entire United States, there's only, out of all of the electricity that we use, only 2% of it is solar. That is not good enough, because we're not going to get to decarbonization or, getting to the place where, we need to get to by 2050 to not have this sort of irreversible damage of climate change. And so we need to accelerate that, right? We need to accelerate the greening of the grid. And so the idea here is, okay, then when you look at the country, there's places like California and even North Carolina that have been driven by regulation or, sort of a lot of pushes, different pushes, but basically they have changed their grid mix quite a bit. And so when you look at the carbon footprint of the electricity that's being generated in some of these places, it's actually a lot cleaner than some other parts of the country. And so what we're interested in is we need to invest in the places that are getting left behind, the dirtiest places. So the West Virginias and the Nebraskas and the Wisconsins and the Missouris and Tennessees of this country, just the middle part of this country where we need more equitable access to clean energy. Those are the places that don't have the investments. And so when you turn on your lights in California, it's very different. Even if we use the same amount of electricity, then if you turn on your lights here in Tennessee, it has a different effect on the environment. And so we need to even that out. We need to invest in these communities, our communities, because otherwise we're going to continue to pollute our own communities by just doing everyday activities like turning on the lights. And so that's where we're trying to solve, dig in and solve that problem, because we need some more investment in those places. And if the government's not going to go in and step in, there's a lot of companies that can step in and help, and it's not incredibly expensive when you look at the sort of the number of companies that can be part of this movement.
Yeah. And that kind of leads into my next question, which is kind of more specific about solar. Could you kind of give us like a snapshot of the state of solar? I know over the past 20 years, the prices continually dropped for panels, but for someone who, for the layperson who knows nothing about solar, what's kind of like the state of solar in the US?
Yeah. So solar, the technology has really advanced quite a bit. We've had solar around for many, many years, but it's really in the past few years that the prices of solar panels have decreased. The technology has gotten better, so a panel can actually take more of that solar energy and convert it into electricity at a more efficient rate, which is great. But unfortunately, it's not. Right now, the problem with solar is that it is not as cost competitive to rebuild that solar infrastructure in these places where there's no sort of other incentive, whether it's regulatory or wholesale price of energy. So the places where these things are getting built are places where the incentives for the utilities or even for the independent power producers are, they're going to get higher prices for building that solar facility. In places like the TVA region is a little bit, it's not as price competitive. So it's not cheaper to build here because there's already a lot of sunk cost in the infrastructure that exists today. So it's this really interesting dynamic where we basically have to think about solar as it is sort of this maturing industry in terms of technology. There's a lot more investments that need to be happening in storage so that when the sun is not shining, we still are generating electricity from it. But also but it's good news that technology is there. It's just now more around how do we incentivize more capital investments in this infrastructure in these places where it's not more economical for a utility to go out and build it because they're worried about the cost and the debt that they have on the assets that they already have producing electricity today. So that's the part where I think will be really interesting to see where the state of solar will be in a few years, because the record number of uptake is huge because we started so small. But now we need to just look at sort of what's underlying all of that stuff and what are the communities that are not getting that, are not seeing that benefit yet.
Yeah, for sure. And the sun does shine everywhere, but I do know there are, the Sun Belt where they have more sun access throughout the year than other places. And just my cursory reading, I found that, one of the real issues is not necessarily the price of solar panels, but the construction of those and retrofitting old grids and, the storage question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the big thing is, and storage is sort of less of a question in the places like Tennessee, where it's like, not even 1% of our electricity generation. What's interesting about solar, so I told you it's 2% of the overall electricity use. Now that I think something like 75% of all of that electricity, solar electricity, is generated in 7 states. So you can imagine the rest of the country sort of, left hanging. And some of these places are not the places where you have the highest sun resource. So even the Sun Belt, if you look at some of those states, it would make sense that you would want to build in those places because it's, there's a lot of sun shining there. It's but those facilities are not getting built in those places because it's sort of, there's a mismatch in the type of, where the incentives lead these new constructions to happen.
Yeah. So next question is a little bit about carbon buybacks, and I feel like you've already covered this, but I'm just going to ask again. Could you explain to us the concept of carbon buybacks and what makes y'all's carbon buyback program unique?
Yeah. So what's interesting about that is basically the way that companies can reduce their carbon emissions. Obviously, they can do everything they can, like I talked about, impact snacks, to lower their carbon footprint by making their own processes more efficient or, greener, more local. But then there's the sort of irreducible carbon footprint that happens as a result of just new activity, new business. And so for us, that's basically what it is. You're taking out that carbon reduction from somewhere else and not directly from your own 4 walls. And so you're taking it out of the grid with us. And so what we're saying is basically for every, and this is fairly new in the US, there's not a lot of other solar carbon offset programs for a number of different reasons. But instead of taking it out of, building a tree to sort of capture the carbon, we're saying let's not burn fossil fuels in the first place, keep them where they belong in the ground, and build new solar infrastructure instead. And so for us, it's fairly simple. You measure your carbon footprint, there's an equivalent amount of new solar watts that you need to build in order to get rid of that carbon and clean up the grid. And so it's generally the rule of thumb for the sort of dirtiest grids in the country. It's about, for 1 metric ton of carbon, which is about 2,205 pounds, for those of us who don't think in metric tons of carbon and think about our weight, and so we know what pounds are. So for that amount, you can build 30 watts of new solar that would be generating clean energy for about a 35 to 40 year lifespan. So that new capacity, think about it as a light bulb, will be generating clean energy for a lifetime in that community. And that's about $12 with us. So 1 metric ton, $12, builds 30 new watts of solar. And 30 new watts of solar is fairly small, but you can imagine a lot of these companies have, or when you either aggregate a bunch of companies or have a big company, their carbon footprint is bigger than those 2,205 pounds. And so it generally, kind of measures up or crowdfunds to 1 million watts, which is what the utility scale solar facilities are. It's 1 megawatt that then gets plugged into the grid that, the lines that we see around here. And that's how Clearloop works.
Excellent. And I guess I should expect nothing less but a super concise way to explain that from the founder of Clearloop. So thank you so much for kind of breaking that down for us. Yeah.
It's been a long time of just trying to figure out if we were just, losing people. When we started talking about it, our whole idea was like, let's make this as simple as possible. But there's a lot of, little intricacies and things that I didn't know. 2 years ago, if you would have asked me how much solar is generated here in the United States, I would have had no idea. So it's been an interesting learning process, but hopefully we can, break it down and just make it really accessible for everybody, because we made it accessible for ourselves.
Yeah, no, for sure. And that actually pairs very well with my next question. Are there any ways for individuals to support the programs that Clearloop has, or, help fund, or is there any plans for an individual buyback program? Or how can people like myself get involved?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we have been thinking of this as sort of a B2B. So this is a business, it's for businesses to be able to reclaim their carbon footprint. But what individuals can do is help us get the word out and help bring awareness to their brands that there is something that they can do that is really tangible. And so on our website, clearloop.us, you can go on there and sign up to just be part of this community that we're trying to create with Clearloop. Obviously, we keep people informed about what's happening and things like that. We send a monthly newsletter and try to get folks just sort of building this community of people who are just thinking about practical ways that they can use their own purchasing power, the sort of everyday purchases that they have, turning those into clean energy. And so that's the best way. We've talked to a few companies that want to offer Clearloop as part of sort of individually to their consumers, but we haven't gotten to there yet. So maybe that will be the next time we have this conversation.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's actually all I have for you today. Thank you so much, Laura, for this time that you've given us, and all this knowledge that you've kind of just imparted on me, and hopefully for the viewers as well. If the viewers have any other questions or anything like that, is there a best way to get in touch with you? Or
yes, the best way is hello@clearloop.us. That we check that very regularly. Email's the best form of communication, especially these days. But yeah, we're really excited to be here in Nashville and in Tennessee specifically. There's not a lot of these companies. Whenever we talk to a lot of the companies, they always expect it to come from the coast, from San Francisco or New York, and it feels really nice to be able to be here in the community that this is impacting and try to make a difference right here. So exciting times ahead, sunnier days ahead, Patrick.
Yes, sunnier days ahead.
Thank you so much for the time, and I'm so thrilled about what you guys are doing with Urban Green Labs. This is an incredible resource, so I'm glad that I can also get to tap into y'all's knowledge and information, and hopefully we'll get to do awesome things together in the future.
Well, I mean, fingers crossed. Yes. Thank you so much for again giving us your time today, and thank you for that humble brag for Urban Green Lab. I'll take that as well.
Awesome.
So like I said, Laura, that's all we have for you today. Viewers, next week we will be speaking with Jennifer Smith, the Nashville's city horticulturalist from Metro Public Works. If you have any questions for Jennifer or recommendation for an organization that you would like to learn more about, please let me know. Shoot me an email. My email address is patrick@urbangreenlab.org. And if you like this program, again, feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel as well as signing up for our newsletter. You can sign up for our newsletter. It's right under our Facebook profile picture, so that way you'll never miss out on what Urban Green Lab is up to. That's all I got for you. Until the next time, remember to live sustainably.